invitada. Lo que tenemos ahora es una conferencia, bueno, tenemos una serie de conferencias, pero antes, como es el primer momento, digamos, oficial en el que estamos aquí, nada más quiero decir algunas palabras para que tengan un poquito de contexto, los que no la tengan clara. Esta es parte de un simposio organizado por la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, UAM-Lerma, pero por fortuna y por fortuna de todos, el simposio se está realizando a la par o entretejido con el Festival Ecos Urbanos. El Festival Ecos Urbanos normalmente se realiza con profesores del TEC de Monterrey y el simposio se realiza en la Universidad Autónoma Metropolitana, y tuvimos a bien hacer la dinámica de juntar fuerzas, de trabajar conjuntamente y con esto compartir espacios, compartir recursos y compartir obviamente conferencias. Así que ojalá que este tipo de eventos y este tipo de relaciones entre instituciones se pueda seguir dando, porque al final de la historia todos salimos ganando. Entonces, para los que no lo tengan todavía claro, ahorita va a haber una serie de conferencias. Después, en la tarde, vamos a tener los conciertos en la fábrica digital, que es un tercer elemento en esta historia, que otra vez, mientras compartir, creo que tenemos todos que aprender a compartir, porque todos salimos beneficiados. Entonces el concierto va a ser en la explanada de la fábrica digital El Rule, que es un espacio nuevo, un espacio de desarrollo de creatividad, un espacio público, un espacio en donde la gente va y toma talleres de manera libre, no curricular por el momento, y adquiere conocimientos en distintas áreas de la cultura digital. Y ya más tarde, cuando se haga la inauguración de los conciertos allá, hablaremos un poquito más a detalle. Entonces todos los que están aquí están invitados a ir a los conciertos. ¿Qué otra cosa les tengo que decir? El día de mañana empezamos aquí, igual a las 10 de la mañana, con una serie de conferencias, con una serie de talleres y misma mecánica. Después nos desplazamos al centro de la Ciudad de México. Para los que no lo tengan claro, la fábrica digital está en la esquina de Madero y Eje Central, contra esquina de Bellas Artes, así que creo que todos podemos llegar. Supongo que si buscamos México, supongo que es lo que va a salir en el mapa, porque es el centro principal de la ciudad. Y con esto yo termino nada más, digamos, esta manera de hacer una invitación, o más bien un agradecimiento a que estén aquí. Después le cedo la palabra a Eric del TEC de Monterrey, y muchas gracias por estar aquí.
Bueno, ya para no reiterar tanto lo que dijo el profesor Hugo, me da mucho gusto que estén aquí. El Festival Ecos Urbanos cumple su cuarta edición. Y bueno, para mí es un gran gusto el que se hayan podido integrar actividades del coloquio de la UAM con las actividades del festival que organiza el TEC de Monterrey. Y bueno, aparte de las actividades de estos 2 días, yo también les quiero hacer la invitación para el resto de las actividades del Festival Ecos Urbanos. La siguiente semana tendremos 3 conciertos, miércoles, jueves y viernes a las 8 de la noche en el patio de la Escuela Superior de Música. Se van a presentar el miércoles y el jueves obras multicanal a 8 canales. Y el viernes, que es nuestro concierto de clausura, se va a presentar la obra de nuestro artista residente, que es el doctor Rob Hamilton, que también va a estar el día de mañana dando plática aquí, por cierto. Y bueno, va a presentar el día viernes en la Superior de Música, como clausura de nuestro festival, un cuarteto de cuerdas con instrumentos de realidad virtual. Entonces, pues las actividades del festival, así como las actividades del coloquio, pues son abiertas a todo público y gratuitas. Entonces, pues yo espero que puedan asistir también a estas actividades. Y no me queda más que presentar al doctor Crhis Chafe, director del Karma de la Universidad de Stanford. Y bueno, creo que ustedes van a dar, digamos, como la presentación oficial, ¿verdad? Ok, entonces los dejo con ellos para que puedan ya dar las presentaciones correspondientes. Gracias.
Gracias a todos por venir. A continuación va a venir a presentarnos el doctor Crhis Chafe, Sonification, Making Data Sound, como una conferencia magistral.
Músico científico y director del Centro de Investigación Informática en Música y Acústica de la Universidad de Stanford, en donde es profesor. Cuenta con un doctorado en artes musicales en composición musical de la Universidad de Stanford.
Un aplauso, por favor.
Hey, well, thank you for the welcome and for inviting me. So to the organizers, great thanks. Splendid to be here, and it's an honor to take about an hour of your time to talk about. Actually, I'm going to put it here. So, yeah, we can set it now. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so as I said, I'll take about an hour, and thank you for your attention to what I'm going to show you. This will be a prelude to a workshop tomorrow, which will be hands-on. And so what I want to do tomorrow is, have you bring your laptops, and we're just going to experiment with how to take data from some source, whatever you choose. I mean, I'll have some examples, but you can find data for just about everything these days, and you can often find it online. So literally, it's something like a spreadsheet which would talk about, I don't know, traffic in Mexico City. That might be good. But you could have numbers which represent density of traffic every day for 7 days a week. And why listen to that? Why not just look at the graph? Well, it's interesting because sometimes we find curious patterns by ear, and those are patterns which we hear because basically because we hear with musical ears, and our musical ears find patterns. So we did this in a workshop a couple weeks ago, and somebody brought some data about power usage in somewhere in England. I forget where, but it was also 7 days a week, continuing for many weeks. And you immediately heard 7/8 rhythm. Da 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 da. You heard the weekends, showing up in the electricity grid, which is kind of fun. Anyway, so things like that become part of the fun that we have. And so we'll do that tomorrow. So if you attend, bring a laptop. If you have an interest in some kind of data, look for a time series of data that would give you some numbers in like in a spreadsheet column, and we'll figure out how to take that and put that to sound. And the technology we'll use will just be a browser on your computer. So if you have a computer and you've installed either Firefox or Chrome, right now those are the limitations to this project. So come prepared for that, and we'll play games. We'll see what we can come up with. So what I'm going to do today is just go through a whole bunch of different projects like that with different types of data, and maybe compare why some data works better than others, and why composing it is easier or not. And kick it off with a actually excerpt from a project that was done here in Mexico City in 2015. And this was at the Centro de Cultura Digital. And that's, downtown, the building that everybody calls Suave Crema, the memorial, that one? Tight tower like that. Well, in the basement, there's a wonderful gallery, and we set up this music in there using many channels of loudspeakers. And the data was coming from the brain of a patient at the hospital at Stanford. So this was pre-recorded data, and we composed something that had both visual and musical aspect to it. And I'm going to play a few minutes of that just to give you an idea of what it looked like. And I'll say that this couldn't happen without several people being involved. First of all, the people that invited us and gave us access to the gallery and the resources to set up this multimedia installation. Secondly, my colleague in the work who did the graphics, his name is Greg Niemeyer, and he's a brilliant person with animation. So the same data that I was sonifying became data for what you're going to see in the graphics. So I'll pause there and just say the sounds that you're hearing are real time from the most important person in the project, who was the patient who donated their data to this. She was being screened for potential surgery for a problem with epilepsy. And in screening, they insert many electrodes inside the head to try to find the focus of where the problem is for her seizure condition. Does everybody know what epilepsy is? If I mention epileptic seizures. In her case, she doesn't suffer the kind of seizure where it's overt, where you see physical contortion, that kind of thing. She had a very passive kind of seizure. She just kind of fall asleep almost. But her brain would be in a state where she couldn't comprehend anything. She would kind of check out after the seizure was over, she'd come back and she'd be back with us again. The surgery that she underwent was successful. So good story. She had her driver's license and her job back. Everything's good. But in the course of screening, this means laying in bed in a hospital for 7, 8, 9, 10 days sometimes, with all of these electrodes recording 24 hours a day. This is a massive amount of data that was collected. And of course, the neurologists are looking to find correlations so they can see what part of the brain tissue that might be beneficial to remove or not, right? So we didn't do this project just for artistic reasons. That's not why she was in there. This is a byproduct of all of that data. And what we're listening to now is just her resting in the bed for, the piece actually goes 21 minutes, but I'm only going to play a fraction of it. And it's when I say real time, it's because we haven't stretched or compressed the time base of it. So what you're hearing is actually the neural dynamics of the brain with nothing special happening, right? She's just daydreaming or whatever she's doing. So basically what we've done is just tune in. And, you know, because it's a 21-minute piece, when you tune in for 21 minutes, your own thoughts start to be affected, I think. You know, it's a little difficult to just show an excerpt of this to get the same effect. But I think you can see where we're going with this, that we're basically trying to bring you inside into this world where, you know, we have 80 billion neurons in our brains. They're firing all the time. They have a code that we absolutely have no understanding of. But the idea that someone could be resting and we could listen to some small fraction of that and hear the events that are maybe, that, you know, certainly are not conscious to the person that we're observing, but we're making them a little bit more conscious to us, but in a musical way. And maybe I shouldn't explain any more about that because I don't understand it either. I mean, I make this work so that we can maybe engage with that kind of data. And sometimes you engage with it and you understand something more. In this piece, this is more very, very surface. It's like going to another place, and that's what we're trying to do. So I can take questions anytime during the talk. So if you'd like to, you know, interrupt me, just say, shout out. It's always good. Some of the projects that I'll show have collaborators, as I mentioned, you know, doctors. So Dr. Joseph Parvizi, fourth on the list, was the neurologist who provided the data and the connection to the patient. The patient encouraged us to try and make some artwork with her data, which is fantastic. And there's Greg Niemeyer's name. He's the artist who's been involved in, a lot of these projects, actually. So I will now, I'll mention tomorrow night at the concert in downtown, I'll play a piece called Tomato Music. And it's this sort of non-intelligible sonification. It's a piece of music, but it comes from tomatoes ripening. And I'll talk about that more in the workshop. I won't play it here. But when you go to it, what you're going to hear is an enormous amount of time that it takes for a tomato to go from a green tomato to a red tomato, 10 days. And that's compressed into 10 minutes, so it's not real time anymore. But then you become very conscious of some of the patterns in ripening, actually. So almost 40 years ago, this is where my group was working. It was at the former Stanford Artificial Intelligence Laboratory. And this is a long time ago in the history of computers. So there was one computer and 100 people sharing it. And of course, the computer was probably as strong as the one inside a phone at the time. But we were already making music. And when I look back on that era, we were making music which related to sonification. So I'm going to play you a little bit of a soundtrack from 40 years ago, where what you're going to hear is a musical performance driven by an algorithm that is a classic computer science programming task or example. This gets assigned in computer science classes. There's a game called the Towers of Hanoi. Does anybody know that? It's got three pegs, and you have discs of different sizes, and you start with all the discs on one peg, and you move them with some moves to get all of them from one peg to the further peg, and you write a computer program that solves that and implements it. So here's something where you're going to hear the computer program solving that puzzle and making musical notes as it does it. So you're going to hear that start in a second. It's going to be the rings moving between the posts. This is after the background intro. There you go. So they're starting to move. So it's solving the puzzle. It's getting a little bit faster as it solves it. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but what happens is it accelerates and accelerates until, boom, it's done, and the guy wrote a successful algorithm for his computer class, right? But you can actually hear the dynamics of the solution playing out here. So I'm going to look at now some time series data. Time series means something which has data points that progress through time. It's very common, you know, like we talked about the traffic, that would be a time series. In this case, we're going to look at a time series related to carbon dioxide level on the planet. So here's this is where I work today. And a round number, if we were to measure the carbon dioxide, we'd see 400 parts per million. It's a little higher than that. This is that same building 100 years ago. At that time, it was the Stanford University president's house. But at that time, CO2 was only 300 parts per million. So this is talking about a jump of 100 ppm in 100 years. So what's that? How do we get that data, and what does it sound like? A lot of the data comes from drilling ice cores in ice caps, either Greenland or in Antarctica. And if you take the data from the ice cores and then use that to drive a performance of sound, this is what you get. So that note, that's the carbon dioxide. The guitar is temperature going up and down. Okay, we just hit the industrial age. You see where this is going. Hold on to your hats. Okay, so we all know that curve from the graph, right? We see this thing. It's often called a hockey stick because it looks like a hockey stick, you know, like this. The last data point here was 2016, so it's actually worse, or it's a higher tone now than it was 2 years ago, because we're still climbing on this curve. This is kind of a soundtrack for today in San Francisco Bay Area, because Stanford University is closed today because the air is so bad we can't have classes. And why is the air bad? It's because we're getting wildfires in the region that are, I think the link to climate change is not controversial anymore for anyone about these wildfires. So what we have is a changed climate in California, which is warmer. You could hear the temperature. It is drier because our effect of the changing ocean that's nearby us has created a drought. It's kind of ironic, but we don't get the rain that we used to get. And drier, hotter, accidental ignition. Right now we're in the midst of a series of fires. And this is the month, this is almost Christmas, right? We never used to have fires in the winter. Last January, March, we had horrendous fires in the middle of the winter. So when I say it's a soundtrack, I'm actually sonifying, I'm trying to provide a little bit of empathy with data that is affecting our lives. There's no question about that. Here's just a little clip of people who do the field work for this.
Far in the north of Greenland, a team of climate scientists from 14 nations, including the U.S., has just completed its first season of drilling a 1.6-mile core of solid ice.
What you see here is a piece of ice from the climate change between the last glacial and the present climate. It's about 11,000 years old, and it contains a lot of tiny little bubbles of the ancient atmosphere.
J.P. Stephenson is the field operations manager for the North Greenland Evian Ice Drilling Project, or NEAM. The project's ultimate goal, to unlock the climate history trapped inside those tiny bubbles.
The beautiful thing about an ice core is that it's got all of these different indicators: atmospheric composition, temperature, mean ocean.
So there are your time series. That's where the data comes from, and we're only using the CO2 from the gas bubbles, and then temperature, which is actually done by extracting a certain kind of hydrogen. I don't know the chemistry of it, but you can find the average temperature 11,000 years ago from a tiny bubble and the concentration of a certain amount of hydrogen of a certain kind. So that's how the scientists turn this into temperature data that we just heard. This is a much longer ice core, so you can see going back 800,000 years on this record. So this is again CO2 and temperature, with temperature as the red trace. And what you're seeing in big peaks and valleys, those are the ice ages during the time. So the planet getting colder and warmer, all of it is preserved in those ice cores that they pull up and analyze. And how would you listen to something like that? So this becomes a problem, right? There's two problems. One is the length. I mean, we could play it really fast and you'd hear rip, 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 and those would be ice ages, right? But we want to slow down and start to appreciate, like some of the hidden dynamics of that. One of the interesting findings is that temperature goes up just before the carbon dioxide goes up. And that's not what's happening today. It's actually a different dynamic. The system is different in the planet because we're forcing the temperature change, not the other way around. And that's only happening in the very last bump. So all the previous bumps have a very different relationship between temperature and carbon dioxide. Even though they generally go up and down together, the actual provocation, the forcing factor is different. And they're related more to what's in explanation of the Milankovitch cycle, which has to do with the Earth's tilt and things like that have an effect on global meteorology that we're seeing here from the ice. So, okay, one thing is length. The other is how would we ever hear the hockey stick at the end, the last 300 years or so? How would we hear that if we sped this thing up? Because it would just go by like, it'd be gone, right? It's, if we kept it linear scale, we wouldn't hear it. So we have to do something in performing this to go at different rates. So there's a 35-minute sonification that goes at different rates, where the last 5 minutes don't look like this. The 30 to 35 minutes are what you just heard, actually, not what is depicted here. So this just shows the problem. And what we've done is now provide a audio walk. So if you ever want to do this and you have 35 minutes, go to icecorewalk.org, download the sound file that's there, plug in your earbuds, so you got it on your phone, and go for a walk. Go for a 35-minute walk with icecore.org, icecorewalk.org, and there's a narration that goes with it, and she'll explain what you're hearing and what was going on the planet during those different periods, right? One of the interesting things is as you slow down, you start to become conscious of geologic time, and that's unusual. Like, I mean, you look at long records of the Earth, and it's kind of inconceivable. Like, how do you experience the time of Popo building, right? Like, this is geologic time. These are processes that happen over incredible expanse of time. How do you actually feel that, like, in your day-to-day experience? Well, we found almost by coincidence that as we slowed down from this kind of going rapidly through tens of thousands of years, every footstep, when we slowed it down, we got to a point where each footstep represented about 100 years. And 100 years in my world, that's a sense of my family. I have 4 generations alive right now. Each of them is about 25 on average, right? So when you think about your own world, your own family, you know, your grandmothers, your grandkids, you know, where you are in this family structure, each time you take a step, that's a new one of those. And all of a sudden I felt it. I could feel progress of time in a way that made sense to me, right? And so you're hearing at the same time, you're hearing what's happening with the planet, you know, as these generations proceed along. So that's what you'll get from this tour. And so any questions there yet? And feel free, you know, like you can take camera pictures of links too if you want. You can find out where that is. And this, I'll also say that this slide deck that I'm showing you here is online, and you can go to it with a mobile phone or laptop and see everything again. And all the sound examples are there too. So you don't have to take notes. So we're going to go into a completely different domain. This is real-time flows of data from the internet. And Greg Niemeyer and I wanted to do something where you would become conscious of the traffic between a computer and the outside world in terms of network packets. So you know how if I send email somewhere to another server somewhere else, it's chopped up into little data packets, and the packets flow on the network until they reach their destination. So this is like a type of data that's crucial to our lives. Everything's being transmitted this way that we depend on, but we don't really sense the dynamics of what's in that cable or what's going on in the Wi-Fi signal. So this project from a long time ago, 2001, was an attempt to hear network traffic. So the guy in the museum, he's a unwitting victim. He had no idea he was being filmed for this at the time. And what I like is, first of all, just that he has this curiosity that you can see in his eyes. Like, his eyes aren't as involved as his ears. I might have a shot of that. Yeah, I do. So, you know, that look. Right, that means that the auditory system is taking over for a little while, and that's something that I'm trying to get in some of my work, right? So that's a good thing. What he's listening to is things that are going dong, 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 or digga, 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 digga. That is internet traffic between the exhibit and some computer out there in the world. There's a how many people here are networking engineers or have taken network engineering classes? Yeah, So I'll say just that it's a very, very common thing that you would have a computer ping another computer just to see if it's online, right? So I can do that from this computer. I can ping my office computer at Stanford, and if we're connected, I'll get an echo. I'll send an echo request. That's the ping, and I'll get an echo reply as the second half of the ping. And I can measure the time that took, right? And it's usually, you know, like from Mexico City to San Francisco and back, it's going to be about 40 milliseconds back and forth, something like that, 40, 50. And I take that number and I just play a tone on like the tones that you heard, with a pitch that is probably in a lower range because that's kind of a long one. So every time I get an echo back, I go dong, and I send another echo request. So it's going dong, 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 dong. And that's a natural rhythm of the ping process going on, and we can hear that. So if a computer is really close on the internet, and you know it's 1 millisecond, you're going to hear like that. It'd be super fast. So that's exactly what this person's hearing, and it's explained in the museum, but what's not so obvious to him is that there are people inside changing which computer is being pinged by the exhibit. So we allowed it to go into this mode where other visitors could go in and ping their, you know, their favorite website or what have you. Another system that we created together wasn't anything to do with the internet. Now it's to do with oxygen and carbon dioxide in the air that we breathe. And again, it's real time, and we're measuring flows of gases now, not flows of data. And the idea was in that big rubber tent there, we had bamboo. And we also had a carbon dioxide sensor that was very, very sensitive. So good that I could look at the data coming from this thing, and I would know how many people were in there with the bamboo. Like I could tell one person or no people, I could see 2 people, and it's just from them breathing, right? That's how sensitive the apparatus was. And you get a sound which plays flutes. So you'll hear some flutes breathing in a second. So that's all being influenced by the visitors just going in and getting close to bamboo plants, right? Now, if there weren't that exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, we wouldn't exist, right? But how often are you actually able to sense that exchange with a plant? So that was where we were going with this, you know, like to try to get people at least in the mind of how interdependent we are with our friends in the plant kingdom. And people would go back days later. They kind of got into it, and so we had return visitors who wanted to go in and you know, hyperventilate and get very tight with the plants. And you could hear that in the data. You know, if somebody went in and started breathing really hard, it would change how the flutes sounded and that sort of thing. So, and then here's a little bit of a shot on the inside of this, captured by a documentary team from Japan. So they're gonna talk a little bit about it. So look at his eyes. Look at her eyes. I love it. Yeah. So, yeah. So that, you know, again, that's part of what I'm driving at, you know, and we'll find out, you know, maybe if we have time later in the talk, that this isn't necessarily about sound is better than visuals, and I don't believe that. I think sound is different from visuals. Better would have to do with other factors that we haven't even talked about yet. But I really find that there's a potency to be had from the combination of visual graph and auditory graphs. So when you have 2 modes going, you get even more, right? You get a richer sense of the data. Now, in medical data, often, like we heard at the beginning, there's just enormous amounts of channels of data, and the recordings are really long. what we're seeing here is actually the first data that I was provided by Joseph Parvizi, and this is an epileptic seizure. So several of the channels get really busy, and then there's a collapse on one side. That's one hemisphere of the brain. Then there's a collapse on the other hemisphere of the brain. Here's where the needles get placed inside the brain. And this is the first example that I did for Dr. Parvizi when he asked me if there was any potential for sonifying this stuff. Oh, and I've somehow gone off my, there we go. Where are they? There it is. Okay, so this will be the start of a seizure. I'll do it again. So you'll hear just before the seizure starts, and then you're going to hear a kind of fast kind of sound, like almost like a trill on an instrument, which is a kind of precursor to the seizure setting itself up in one of the hemispheres. So listen, I'll point it out. There. That's the trill. Okay, and it gets really strident, and I'm not going to play it all for you because we'll hear some more description about this from Dr. Parvizi. But this is, whoop, and that's him, and he's very loud. Hold on. Yeah.
Joseph Parvizi, I'm associate professor at Stanford University. What we are about to hear is the sound of the brain in 3 states. The first state is the normal brain activity with a normal heart rate in the background. The second state is the seizure activity when hundreds of thousands of neurons fire together, fast and rhythmic, and the heart rate is clearly up. The third state is the postictal state when all the neurons that were firing together have become very tired and they are having very loud and slow pattern of activity during which patient is usually confused and disoriented and cannot think clearly. You hear the sound of the brain, normal brain activity in the foreground, and in the background you hear the sound of the heart. Now you hear that the sound of the brain is becoming more disorganized, going into more rhythmic and faster activity, and the heartbeat has become faster. Here we are in the midst of seizure. As you can hear, the heart rate has become significantly faster, and the brain sounds are much more rhythmic, yet the patient is quiet, lying in bed. You may not even notice she's having seizure. Now, the seizure has stopped. You hear these loud noises as if some forces are coming in to stop the firing of so many hundreds of thousands of neurons together. Brain is tired. Patient is often disoriented or confused. And the heart rate goes back to normal.
Right. So it's hard stuff to listen to, and you know, we've basically passed through a storm in someone's interior where they're not even conscious of it. They know they've had trouble, but they're mostly comatose during the course of what you just heard. Yeah, and when I first played, the very first example for Dr. Parvizi, he jumped on this project because it was the first time in his life that he felt like he was experiencing what his patients experience, or what they're going through. So that's the hard part. That's the gripping part. We often have people in audiences who will say, but that's really disturbing stuff that you just played. And Parvizi's response to that is, yes, it is. So creating empathy, I guess, is one of the potentials here. Just on the hockey stick, you get kind of a visceral feeling for something that could be any type of data. Now we took this project into a kind of different form that you're going to see in next, which is we created a brain stethoscope. So you heard the heartbeat. That was more like a regular cardiac stethoscope, the typical kind you would use, in a checkup in a hospital. But we've created something where you could hear these sounds very quickly from someone who's under care. And let's see if I gotta find my. We have a stalled presentation that I'll have to debug here real quick. Let's do that. Let's see, it's unresponsive. Okay. So we're going to kind of jump into this project here. Sorry about the advertisement.
Stanford University.
Hi.
Our senses are tuned to very different things. Whereas the visual system is very good at detecting the edges of objects and motion of objects across space and color versus dark, the auditory system is actually tuned to frequencies. And the frequencies of the brain are the critical information we're trying to extract.
This device is an EEG recorder that acquires the brain waves through some sensors that have to be coupled with this device. And once the brain waves are being recorded, you can click this button here. That's the brain stethoscope button. And as you do that, it will turn the brain waves into sound. It relies on the code and the algorithm that we have worked on. And it enables someone who doesn't know how to read EEG to be able to actually get meaningful diagnostic information at the bedside.
When things are calm, the sound is actually just almost a background hum. When a seizure condition exists, there's no longer that calm background hum. It's very, very prominent, high amplitude, rhythmicity. You hear an intense sound, and you hear it kind of almost screaming.
I think majority of people think all seizures are compulsive, but that's actually not the case, especially not the case in critically ill patients in the intensive care units. What we did in this study was to actually send the same EEG files to neurologists and medical students and nurses. Neurologists were asked to review the EEGs exactly the same way as traditionally been done, namely by visual inspection. And nurses and medical students were asked to review the EEGs by listening to the sound.
The ability of an untrained medical student or nurse to read an EEG is 50%. They're either going to say it is or it isn't there and it's chance. What we found was that when just listening to the sound of the EEG, medical students could pick up a seizure when there was one, 97% of the time. So it was really effective for people who don't have as much EEG training to listen to the EEG and get the diagnostic information they need to make a real treatment decision.
Okay, so that's the topic of how sonification, the kind of experimental thing we do, and maybe musical investigations that we like to do and create pieces with, might actually go out and do something in the field. And there's no surprise there. If you go into a hospital, there's a lot of sounds going on in clinics. There are monitors that are using every possible channel, like your eyes, your ears. Sometimes your smell is part of what's going on. So it's just about awareness and communication. Here's a place where using your ears is really difficult unless you use these techniques. So we all know what fracking is. This idea that you try to get gas from underground by stimulating the rock really high pressure. So you make little cracks in the rocks and the gas can flow to the wells. So that's called hydrofracking or fracking. And it's very controversial in the US and Canada, and I don't know about Mexico. Is it happening here? Yeah, okay. Is it controversial here? Yeah, okay, good. So because basically you're underground and you're changing the subsurface. You're creating little micro earthquakes under high pressure. Well, what's surprising is that the engineers who are doing the fracking, they're kind of flying blind. They don't know the effect that they're getting until afterwards. They do an analysis of data that was recorded over here. This shaft has geophones in it. They're like microphones that can sense disturbances in the rock. And so many channels of geophones, and they collect data while they're stimulating, and then they stop and they look at it later. So the idea here is real-time listening to the rocks cracking. So I'm going to play two examples. See if you hear the cracks. So it's almost buried in the noise, but you hear these little pops and cracks, and that's the shale rock having micro events. And they want to make sure they get enough of those, but they don't want to do too many, So it's one of these things where they don't know while they're doing it. It's like driving without any sense of how fast you're going. Like close your eyes and push on the gas pedal. So the next one is from a different time in this recording that was provided to me. And I heard something that nobody had ever talked about from the fracking site. And it's crazy. So you listen to this, there's a mystery sound. Yeah, exactly. It's like tapping a drum. Yeah, and I asked if anybody knew what that was. They had no idea, right? But it's there, it's underground, and we've put our ears underground, so we're kind of aware of it. But is it some very hard to imagine thing in the rock that's going like pulsing like that? Or is there some monster underground? I have no idea. But that's the fun of this is, you're now using your ears to come up with different views. So far we've looked at things that happen in time, right? Time progresses, values change, sounds happen as sounds. But what about doing projects where you're going to listen to a structure that's fixed? How would you do that? Like a crystal. How do you listen to the shape of a crystal? So that's the next category of things that I like to bring up. And this work that kind of got me involved with structures and scratching my head, like how do we do this, was sponsored by a group that now has written a book about these projects. And what they did was they got 7 scientists and 7 artists, and they put us together in a pool and then chose pairs of us. So I got really lucky. I was paired with Mariana Leguia, who is a synthetic biologist. That is, she's an engineer who creates new organic molecules that do things. Like, if you're an electrical engineer, you're going to build a circuit that resonates, let's say, or amplifies something. That's electrical engineering. If you're a synthetic biologist, you're going to build a circuit that might create insulin, like a new drug factory or something like that. And so Mariana's work is all there in the DNA. So one of the first things we did was to take a sample from her laboratory and listen to it. And that's what I'm going to play you next. Let me find it. This sample is in the form of a plasmid, which is a ring of DNA that's coupled at its ends. So it's a true ring, and it has about 5,000 DNA base pairs in it. So the base pairs look like this when you write it out sequentially, and you'll see the C's, T, A, G. Those are the nucleotides which life is made out of, I suppose. And what we're going to do is go around very fast at first, and what I'm doing is sonifying the CGAT for the 4 letters with different kinds of knocks on a synthetic instrument. That kind of thing, difference. So it's kind of a subtle difference, but when we slow down enough, we'll hear something that's a kind of funny rhythm of that. And that comes from here. So at first, we're going to spin around the room very fast, and we're going to go right around the ring of 5,000. We'll go around a couple times, and then we'll slow down. And Mariana is going to be pronouncing the names of the colored areas here. And these are the things that she works with as the engineer. These are the components of her constructions, and they have names. So here's her voice.
Promoter, N721, Enter site, ampicillin, kanamycin, R6K origin of replication. Promoter,
so we'll go back to the slide. So now we're going much slower, right?
Med7, cleavage site, Mid21, cleavage site, terminator. Ampicillin, kanamycin.
So can you hear the sort of fluctuation of, those are the CATG patterns going on.
R6K origin of replication.
And then
aspartic acid,
and now we're going to go really slow.
tyrosine, alanine, threonine,
Those are the names of the amino acids at the lowest level.
serine, arginine, glutamine,
They're all,
leucine,
there's 21 of them or 22, something like that. And those are other,
leucine,
so we're going to speed up.
proline, isoleucine, promoter,
And I'm gonna stop there and just say that the way this ends is we go back the other way. We go from this really low, like let's call it machine code, all the way back up to this fast thing where we've got a plasmid in our mind, right? So it's like playing with levels of abstraction. So before I quit, I'm gonna play you one more kind of sonification of structure using the same data from, or Mariana's type of data. And I think I have it here. Wait a minute, unless I've got it in the wrong place. Let me see. Yeah, here it is. Okay. This is what Mariana's work consists of. She'll take a little bit of a fluid, send it in for DNA analysis, and it'll come back with the sequences that you saw that come off of a chart like this called chromatogram. And the green, the red, the blue, black, those are the CATG substances. These are the base pairs. And basically you start with a really big impulse at the beginning of an analysis, and then it goes down, 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 down. And I looked at that and I thought, oh, well, that's like listening to the sound of a room. Like if I clap my hands in this room, you'll hear a big spike, and very quickly it dies off. There's some echoes, but they die off really quick. So I showed Mariana what a room impulse looks like, and she said, oh, that's a chromatogram. So we were looking at different kinds of data, but they had the same shape of a big impulse followed by a decay. And what that suggested was, let's take DNA and make a room out of it. Because we can take these impulse responses, this is what we do in convolution reverb in computer music. We take a balloon pop in a room, we record it, and then we put a dry sound through it, and it sounds like it's in the room. It's a way of fingerprinting a room and imparting that room on a sound. So you're going to hear some synthetic salsa rhythm that a student of mine did. So it's going to be dry, and then we're going to put it through some DNA. And we'll do 6 different DNAs, so I'll count them off. You should hear a change in the quality of the room that this is being played in. So first it's the dry. So that's dry. Okay, first DNA. Second. And then back to the dry. Right, so you can, so what you've heard is totally bizarre. Like, why would you ever play percussion music in a DNA molecule? But it's the kind of stuff we can do because we have tools for like crossing our domains with each other and making music. I'll finish with the one that had come up here, where this is literally a model of a room that's going to be built. They make impulses inside a model like this in a scaled down room, and they listen for the echoes in the concert hall, and then they slow that down, and they actually put music into the pop that they recorded in this model. We did this with a really, really huge room in Istanbul called the Hagia Sophia. Does everybody know this wonderful giant temple in Istanbul? It's from 700 AD, and it was built as the largest room in the world at the time. And then it became a Christian church, and then a mosque, and now it's a museum. And you can't go sing in there, but a wonderful singer Persian singer came to our lab and sang with headphones on where he was singing into the model of the Hagia Sophia. And so you'll hear him kind of experimenting with this space musically, which is, to me, is another kind of sonification. So he's doing what we all do. You know, if you go into a tunnel, there's a real chance that you're going to experiment, go like, whoo, you know, and just to listen to the echoes. Well, here's this, you know, world famous singer doing that with his practice, and you could hear him changing his tempo, matching the modes of the room, you know, really coming in tune with what he was hearing in the headphones. So he was coming in tune with a structure. And it's just another kind of, in a way, sensing structure, I think. So anyway, I'm gonna close there. That was a full hour's worth of me playing probably too many things, but there's a lot more. And if you go to this slide deck, as I said, it's on my homepage, and it'll say the date and CDMX, I think. So you can get to them to have more. So I'm gonna quit there and say thank you for your attention. Bye. Yeah. I don't know, maybe there's a moment for a question, if there is any questions. You know, please, yeah. Yeah, you totally could. Yeah, it's ready to do. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, and that was the beauty of that project, was we didn't have to deliver anything. It was just like, hey, let's compare what we do and sort of have fun. And we didn't think of that one. That would be a good one. I think so. Yeah. I don't think there is no one definition. You know, that's for sure. That's what I like to kind of end with Reza Shajarian singing into a space. He's using his ears. He's learning a space. The space is data, I guess. Yeah, something like. Yeah. Sure, Mario.
Thank you very much for your lessons.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I have a question. How do you make the decision in the mapping what to map? The data or the pitch and all the space and all these musical parameters? Do you have any system or what kind of decision do you make when you map this data into the parameters?
Yeah. Right. So I think everybody understands what you're saying is because, you know, you have to go from the original type of data that you have, whatever format that is in, and ultimately you have to use that to change the performance of some sound. You have to go from traffic data, which is in hundreds of thousands of cars per hour, some number like 100,000, and now you're going to make a sound with a pitch. And what's a pitch? A pitch would be 440 hertz. Well, you can't go from 100,000 straight to the pitch because we wouldn't hear it. It'd be too loud. So you have to make a decision about how to convert or translate from one domain to the other domain. And we call that mapping. That's a general term used in sonification. So I would say the first thing that I do when I get going with a new project is I take the graph that I can see and I put it into a range where I play something very simple, like a sinusoid oscillator, and I make the changes so that 100,000 is now in a good range that I can listen to. And then I make sure that what I'm hearing corresponds to what I'm seeing. So that's the ground truth. That's like a testing phase. I don't like listening to sine waves too much, so I then try to choose an instrument. And I often look for a correspondence between the data itself, like what is the world of the data, and I want to express that in sound. So if it's human data, like from here, I use human voice because it's human data. If it's underground and it's cracking sounds, then I make a cracking sonification kind of thing, right? So I tend to do that just to kind of keep the connection, and beyond that, I think there's a lot of just composer stuff that you know very well yourself. I mean, you listen a lot, you try different things, you use your experience from other projects to maybe shape it, and then you get some wild ideas and put them in there. That's what we'll do in the workshop tomorrow. Is we'll try to take some sample data sets, we'll change the mapping, see what it does, and so on. So we'll have time to do that. Yeah, I think probably done. If yeah, thanks. Yeah, great. Yeah, thank you.
¿Alguien tiene alguna pregunta que hacerle al doctor Crhis, Chafe? ¿Preguntas?